Our chalice lighting this morning is called Candles by Carl Dennis. If on your grandmother's birthday you burn a candle to honor her memory, you might think of burning an extra to honor the memory of someone who never met her, a man who may have come to the town she lived in, looking for work and never found it. Picture him taking a stroll one morning after a month of grief with the want ads, to refresh himself in the park before moving on. Suppose he notices on the gravel path the shards of a green glass bottle that your grandmother, then still a girl, will be destined to step on when she wanders barefoot away from her school picnic if he doesn't stoop down and scoop the mess up with a want ad section and carry it to a trash can. For you to burn a candle for him, you needn't suppose the cut would be a deep one, just deep enough to keep her at home the night of the hayride when she meets Helen, who is soon to become her dearest friend, whose brother George, 30 years later, helps your grandfather with a loan so his shoe store doesn't go under in the Great Depression, and his son, your father, is able to stay in school, where his love of learning is fanned into flames, a love he labors later to kindle in you. How grateful you are for your father's efforts is shown by the candles you've burned for him. But today, for a change, why not a candle for the man whose name is unknown to you? Take a moment to wonder whether he died at home, with friends and family, or alone on the road, on the lookout for no one to sit at his bedside and hold his hand, the very hand it's time for you to imagine holding. I light this chalice for all the unknown acts of generosity and courage from others throughout history and from ourselves that have touched each of our lives in profound ways.
Spirit of life, Spirit of all that is, that moves within us, may you encourage us and be with us as we turn inward with courage. May we open ourselves even more fully to that eternal mystery which lures us onward towards life and creativity. May we find the courage to live our faith, to speak our truth, and to strive together for a world where freedom abounds and justice truly does roll down like water. May we know the fullness of love without fear and the serenity of peace without turmoil. May we hold one another in the deep and tender places with compassion, and may we grace one another by sharing our own vulnerabilities, being ever mindful of the divinity within that makes soulmates of us all.
Our reading, talking about heroes and how each one of us are heroes in our own lives, going through struggles and cycles, losses, failures, and then the recovery and the learning from that. We have a reading from The Power of Myth, which is a book many of you probably have read. And it includes a piece of an interview that Neil Moyer made to Joseph Campbell.
Why are there so many stories of the hero in mythology?
Because that's what's worth writing about. Even in popular novels, the main character is the hero or heroine who has found or done something beyond the normal range of achievement and experience. A hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself.
So in all of these cultures, whatever the local costume the hero might be wearing, what is the deed?
Well, there are two types of deed. One is the physical deed, in which the hero performs a courageous act in a battle or saves a life. The other kind is the spiritual deed, in which the hero learns to experience the supernormal range of human spiritual life and then comes back with a message. The usual hero adventure begins with someone from whom something has been taken, or who feels there is something lacking in the normal experiences available or permitted to the members of his society. This person then takes up a series of adventures beyond the ordinary, either to recover what has been lost or to discover some life-giving elixir. It's usually a cycle, a going and returning.
I was a young adult when The Power of Myth first came out on PBS in the late 1980s. You remember back then, maybe some of you? Finally, I thought my life purpose was before me. For the first time, I realized that I too could be on my own hero's journey. But what exactly is a hero? And who are our heroes? Our theme for the month of January is courage. And I always thought of a hero as someone with more courage and ability than most people. The one who can save the day, so to speak. The legendary scholar of myth and religion, Joseph Campbell, defines a hero, as we just heard, as someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself. These are the common themes that come up when we look at the life of heroes. They have courage to embark on an adventure, often for the sake of others. They often possess a noble character or ability, allowing him or her to perform extraordinary and beneficial deeds. And they have incredible physical and/or mental strength. A hero often goes through a transformation and often risks or sacrifices their own life for a bigger purpose. So I would like to tell you a story of two friends of mine, Dave and Ed. Back in the early 80s, we were all undergrads together at the University of Northern Colorado School of Music, and we had a large group of friends that all hung out together and played lots of music together. Well, my friend Ed was this amazing, screaming trumpet player. You would have loved him, I have to say, who could improvise circles around most everyone. He was the lead trumpet in the top jazz band. And if you know anything about the University of Northern Colorado, you know that it is one of the top 4 jazz schools in the United States. He could play avant-garde or bebop and still come up with sweet, inventive, and beautiful lines. Away from his trumpet, however, Ed was a very odd person. As many of us are. Seems like especially in the School of Music. He unfortunately had a very low self-concept and was never satisfied with himself. He beat himself up all the time, thought he was a terrible person, and he was obsessive compulsive. So he had a very difficult time fitting into our social world. Now, Dave, on the other hand, was this big, sweet guy who was unusually kind to everyone. He was kind of quiet, but we all knew he was a fantastic musician. He was a composer, so the rest of us didn't get to perform with him as much as everyone else. And unfortunately, I took those friendships for granted and lost touch with both Ed and Dave years later. We just move on in life. We didn't have Facebook back then, right? So 15 years later, I had a master's degree in music education and 13 years of teaching experience, and I was hired to be the new choir director for the University of Northern Colorado Laboratory School. A week after I started working, I was shocked when Ed showed up in my room to begin cleaning it. I found out that he had dropped out of school without finishing his degree, and he had become a janitor for the university. He had convinced himself that he could no longer play, and he sold his trumpet. Well, to make a long story short, we became good friends again, and I used to take him out for pizza at Old Chicago's all the time and listen to his troubles, and we had a lot of fun, but he was pretty depressed and often talked about the old days. Now, Dave I had always stayed in contact with Ed, and I didn't realize that they were such close friends. Dave had become a rather well-known classical and jazz music composer and a university professor back east. One spring, he contacted Ed, and he told him that he was going to give this concert at this famous jazz club in New York City called the Knitting Factory. It was going to be new songs he had just written, and the jazz band was going to be all of his favorite players from over Dave's entire music career. Then Dave dropped a bombshell on Ed. He told Ed that he wanted him to play lead trumpet with this group. Well, Ed tried to say no, of course, and he didn't have a horn, and he could no longer play. So Dave promised to buy him a brand new, hand-built, $4,000 Schilke trumpet, just so that he could do this gig and start playing again. Yeah. He gave Ed 6 months to get his chops back together, and then he would fly him to the East Coast for rehearsals and multiple performances in New York City. After a week of resistance, Ed finally gave in because Dave simply would not take no for an answer. Never in my life, I have to say, did I ever see a person freak out with as much excitement when Ed finally accepted. You see, when Ed finally got his new trumpet, he could hardly stop playing long enough to even go to his job. He would call me up on the phone, Dana, you gotta listen to this. I just can't get my high notes out anymore. And then he would rip off this string of amazing stratospheric notes with blazing speed. And I would just laugh. Yeah, Ed, I wish I couldn't play high notes like that. The transformation that came over Ed was an incredible and inspiring process to watch. His darkness suddenly turned to this pure, creative light that we all remembered. He was finally, for the first time in years, maybe even decades, finally alive again. The time to leave for New York eventually came, and I took Ed to the airport. The concerts all went amazingly well. Old friends came out of the woodwork for the shows in New York City, and Ed was a star. Suddenly, people wanted him to play other gigs all across the country with them. When he returned from his great adventure, he was completely a new man. His entire life was turning around. And this all happened one lovely October, thanks to Dave. What none of us knew was that just a few months later, in January, after his 43rd birthday, Ed suddenly dropped dead from a heart attack. In the midst of my own shock and grief, I couldn't keep from thinking about Dave and what an amazing impact he had had on Ed's life, never knowing that it was about to end. We had a great celebration of Ed's life at a large gathering. Of course, it had to be at Old Chicago's. Old friends came from all around the country. You know, knowing Ed as I did, I know he thought no one would have ever showed up for his funeral, for a memorial service. And the place was packed. Old friends came around, flew in from all over, and sent letters and emails of memories and stories. We laughed endlessly about Ed's crazy creative escapades. The knowledge of what Dave did for Ed flew around our worldwide music community very quickly. Dave became a living hero, and we were all amazed, awed, and inspired by what he had done. Not only did his actions change Ed's life, but he had become a tremendous inspiration for the rest of us as well. What we didn't know was how this experience also transformed Dave. It brought new meaning to his life, and he had a new sense of satisfaction that he had never experienced before. But he would always say he just did what he had to do. He knew what he wanted and he went for it. He didn't have any superhero powers. He was just a regular guy. Except to all of us who had witnessed these acts of courage, we didn't see Dave as a regular guy anymore. I don't know Dave all that well. I wish I did. And I don't know how he managed to have the courage to make this happen. But he managed to pull Ed up out of the great depths of his own fears, to muster his own courage to do something unimaginable. It is not overstating it to say that Dave gave Ed his life back just before it was over. You see, Dave believed in Ed when Ed had given up on himself long ago. Dave demanded that Ed at least try. He demanded that Ed face those powerful demons that kept him from playing music that he loved. And Dave supported Ed by giving him a new narrative that said, yes, you are good enough. In fact, I know you're brilliant, and I am going to remind you of that every day until you begin to see it. We too must foster courage from within. One of my favorite teachers, Pema Chodron, explains it this way. The most fundamental aggression to ourselves, the most fundamental harm we can do to ourselves, is to remain ignorant by not having the courage and the respect to look at ourselves honestly and gently. Yet so often we cannot muster the courage to do this without the helpful and supportive community. We too need someone to tell us, yes, you are good enough. In fact, I know you are brilliant, and I am going to remind you of that every day until you begin to see it. The Unitarian Universalist minister Galen Gingrich puts it this way. Courage within requires support from without. Courage arises from a heart made strong by people who believe in us and a world that sustains us. That, my friends, is what this community is all about. This is a place where you should be able to receive that unconditional love and support as you too walk into the darkness to face your own demons. Today, after the service, many of us will be gathering to talk about small group ministry. This, I don't think it's overstating at all. This is the gift that small group ministry gives to this community. It is that place where you are held with love and unconditional support that encourages you to believe in yourself once again. You see, here's what I know. I know I am standing in front of a group of people who perform their own heroic deeds all the time. People just like my friend Dave. And yet I also know that we are champions at beating ourselves up with messages to ourselves about how worthless we are and how unlovable we are, just like Ed. That's how our culture is. Living out there on the border between conscious and the unconscious mind, we carry these demons of shame that we don't want to see or even admit that they're there. Unfortunately, this is a part of the human condition, and it is especially strong in our culture that was built on notions of original sin and the endless demand to not think highly of ourselves. And that's being humble, right? And even without knowing your histories, I know that many of us here today have had people in our lives reinforcing these messages of shame by telling us what terrible people we are. The really heartbreaking truth is that deep down, we believe it. I know that my friend Dave is no different in this regard either. He too carries this. If you think about it, even most of the advertising that we are bombarded with every day is aimed at making us feel inadequate so that we will buy the product to make us feel good about ourselves again, except it never works. And the really ironic part is that each and every one of us would be quick to tell everyone else in the room that perspective is totally wrong about them. We see the worth and the beauty and the genius and the brilliance in each other. But we struggle to see those qualities in ourselves. I'm no different, by the way. I struggle with this too. Just ask my husband, he'll tell you. And yet, what is the cost? The cost is our happiness and our well-being. The cost is never being able to face those deepest longings of our soul and to live into them. And when we have a world full of people who are full of shame, some more than others, we see rage and hatred and killings. So many of our wise teachers tell us that to save the world, we must begin with ourselves. And this is what they are talking about. We cannot heal anything until we face our own demons, which takes our greatest courage and the support of others. Consider the story for all ages. The drunk man was hurting so deeply, he didn't know what to do, he didn't know where to turn, no one was helping him, and all he could do was take out his rage on other people. Rage and violence, as we heard from Terry Dobson, cannot heal rage and violence. Only love, compassion, and acceptance can do that, as was demonstrated by the old man. The researcher and inspirational speaker Brené Brown shares from her research that learning to own our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy. The experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. Oh. So when I'm down on myself, no wonder I feel uncomfortable around other people. Self-acceptance comes from facing our inner demons, not to fight them, but to heal them with our own self-love and compassion. When we accept our own story, all those pieces of truth of who we are, when we turn around and look those demons in the face and say, yes, this is who I am no longer holding on to shame. The demons suddenly fade away as we are unexpectedly graced with a new sense of belonging and joy and vibrant aliveness. So don't run away from them. They actually have gifts to share. Turn and face them. Name them, and they lose their power. We must choose to have the courage to enter that proverbial cave and joust with our own personal dragons in order to discover the treasure hidden deep within our very souls. Joseph Campbell also says, "The cave that you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek." So enter the cave, my friends. It's worth the risk. This fundamental courage to practice frees us to finally listen to our deepest longing. It frees us to become vulnerable and vibrant and fully alive. Is there anyone here who does not want to be fully alive? Is there anyone here who does not want to give up the fears and the shame that have such a grip on your life? I didn't think so. The one thing that I hope for you more than anything in the world, I always try to find something worthwhile to preach about, you know? The one thing that I wish for you and that I wish for myself is to be truly alive. Truly alive and free and vulnerable and vibrant, living your heart's desire. So my friends, may we strengthen each other in making that happen. And with that, I have to share with you one last quote from Joseph Campbell. "Furthermore, we have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all times have gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path, and where we have thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. And where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we will come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be alone, we will be with all the world." May your journey be a good one, and may you journey the hero's path. Amen.